Welcome to this week's episode where I am going to show you how we truly built this one-of-a-kind epoxy tables. I'm going to take you on this journey and show you our step-by-step methods, our techniques, and I'll pop in a tip or trick as we go along. And you also do want to stay along until the end of this video because I'm going to show you guys something we've never showed before on any of our previous videos we ever posted. So starting this week's project off, we are building a 10-seater epoxy table, a boardroom table for one of our big clients, and the specific wood species we're going with is called Matumi. You will never find this wood anywhere else in the world except in South Africa. It's coming in the northern parts of South Africa and it's an insanely beautiful wood to work with, and you'll see what I'm doing here is this was an actual off-cut piece that was too long that I thought to myself we can use this off-cut piece in the corner of the table, which ended up looking insanely beautiful. Now just cutting that specific piece to size with my Capex, and honestly do have to say the Capex makes the work so easy. Moving to the next step, and that's to actually build a mold. You're basically building a dam to make sure once you're going to pour your epoxy that there's actual something to keep your epoxy intact, and that's the goal and the reason we build a mold for all our tables. And just using a nail gun, you can use screws if you really want to, and you do have to make sure that you apply silicone on the inside of your mold. Moving to the next step, and that's to actually calculate epoxy. And in this video we are not going into detail, but I do want to share something with you, something we have been busy the last 3-4 months, and that is that we made an online epoxy masterclass. It's a 3-hour course. It's going into detail on how we as a epoxy company manufacturer build all our tables. It's going into detail, showing you all our methods, our techniques, tips and tricks, and I'm breaking down all the topics for building a epoxy table successfully. Now, like I said, the course is 3 hours long. It's $89. Down in the description of this video, you're going to find a link that's going to take you to the online epoxy masterclass. You guys do not want to miss this masterclass. You know, let me give you a short preview of what you can expect in this masterclass. Welcome to this online epoxy masterclass. Moisture content. You hit right into the core wood species to remove the bark with an aggressive steel wire brush. Table design, slab preparation, building process, epoxy mold. Release agent wax, calculate epoxy. 7, 8, so we got 16 points. Mixing epoxy, color consistency, whether to seal your live edges or not. Pouring epoxy. Sanding between layers, sanding grooves inside your epoxy, dealing with bubbles. Maximum depth, curing time. Removing the table from your mold. A local CNC supplier. Start sanding, cutting your table to size and edge. Filling the cracks and holes. Smoky finish, high gloss see-through finish. Wood surface finishing, tabletop supports. To drill into our wooden section. Our online epoxy masterclass is finally here. It's 4 hours of masterclass where I'm going into detail on how we build all our epoxy tables, where I'm going to teach you from start to finish how to build a epoxy table successfully. I'm going to show you all our methods and techniques we take in our everyday business building epoxy tables successfully. Down in the description of this video, you're going to find the details on how to purchase this masterclass. You don't want to miss this one. So yes guys, you absolutely do not want to miss this masterclass. Moving back to our project, and that's by placing our dry fumigated slabs into the mold. That's a very critical step if you want to build a successful table, is to make sure that your slabs are 100% dry. The moisture content needs to be around about, well, less than 11%. Moving to the next step, the epoxy we are using is called Crystal 100. It's a product from South Africa. It's obviously imported from somewhere. I'm not sure where, and I'm not sure if you get this epoxy available worldwide. And this is a critical part of the project to make sure that your ratios are accurate. Otherwise, your epoxy is not going to set and your project can be a massive disaster. Just adding the hardener to our epoxy, and now we are adding the blue pigments because the client did ask for a blue epoxy table. And this is the satisfying part of this project, and that's the mixing part. And I did not record the part I wanted to show you, but if you want to see your end color, you can just take a transparent see-through cup and just scoop a little bit of epoxy in around about the same thickness as you plan to pour your table, and that is going to give you a good idea of what your end color is going to be. Now, moving to the most satisfying part of any epoxy project, and that is by pouring your epoxy. And the one tip I want to give you in pouring your epoxy is, I don't know where you are from in the world, but climate is a very important topic when it comes to epoxy. Is your room environment very warm? Is your room environment very cold? And that can result in bubbles if your room temperature is very cold, because it's not going to give the air bubbles sufficient time to come up out of the epoxy. That's why there's a few methods you can do by removing the bubbles. And the first method is obviously a vacuum chamber, which we are busy investing and looking into. The second part is pouring very thin layers, and as you can see here, I am just popping all the bubbles with my gas flame gun. And you can pour all the way up depending on the epoxy you use, but we choose just to pour small layers at a time. The next tip I want to give you is by actually warming your epoxy before you're going to pour your epoxy. Now, the way we use it is we got a very big pot on a gas stove, and we will put the epoxy into the pot that's got warm water inside, and we will most probably leave it for about 3 hours to warm. And before I go on with my topic, I just want to share this with you. You will see this layer is tacky, and that's super critical when you're going to pour your next layer, to make sure that each layer you're pouring on is tacky. Now, the other method you can use in warming your epoxy is to actually leave it in the sun, and that will make your epoxy more liquidy. If you are in a warm environment, say like Australia or whatever, you will not have this issue. Then you actually need room temperature control to make the epoxy colder, because your epoxy can actually overheat, and that will result in a disaster in your project. So once our table has been casted to the top, according to our supplier specification, we have to leave it for around about 5 to 10 days, and we've done that, and now it's time to remove your table from the mold. And I'm just using a hammer and a chisel. I'm not too worried at this stage about damaging the underside of my table, because we are going to put the table on a CNC machine, and this is also a very satisfying part of the project, is to see your blue color and to send the pictures to your client. And this is the underside, and the layout is just absolutely beautiful. Moving to the next step in our project, and that's by cutting our table to its final size. And the tip I want to give you is, when you build your epoxy table, always make sure that you build your table slightly bigger lengthwise and widthwise. This is just going to help you if you're going to make an error somewhere in your project, that there is actual room for error. And we just make our tables around about 20 millimeters lengthwise and 20 millimeters widthwise, so we can just cut our table down to its final size later on, as you can see, as I'm doing here with my Festool track saw. The other thing a lot of people ask me is, how do we actually fasten our steel bases to the underside of our table? Now I'm just going to give you a quick rundown. We custom build our steel frames according to the layout of our tables, and we will use threaded insets to fasten all our steel bases to the underside of our tables. As you can see here, I'm just using a 10mm drill bit to drill the holes I pre-marked on the previous step, and then we will use a countersink bit to make sure, once we're going to insert our threaded insets, that the head of our threaded insert is actually going to sit flush with our table. And moving to the part where we're going to add the threaded insets into our table, and the advice I want to give you is, you do get a lot of threaded inserts on the market. Go for the biggest one, don't go for the brass ones, try to go for the steel ones, because they are much stronger. Moving to the next step in our project, and that is start sanding. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of CNC lines the CNC machine made, and we will start straight away with our Festool Rotex machine with an 80 grit sandpaper on the Rotex setting. This is super critical. If you don't remove those lines the first time, even if you go to 120 or 180 grit, if you don't remove the lines, you're going to sit with a problem once you're going to start oiling your table. So we would start with a 80 grit, then we will move up all the way to 400 grit, depending on the finish you want. Moving to the next step, and you will see as you sand and go forward, there will be minor cracks and holes you do have to close on your project. And I'm just using an air hose to clean all the cracks and holes. Then we've got this really cool crystal UV quick set epoxy. Basically needs sunlight or UV light to set in a matter of seconds, and this is a super critical part for us as a epoxy company manufacturer, is to give your client what they actually pay for. And we don't want to sit with a lot of small cracks and holes on our table, and that's why we are actually closing it. The way we previously done it is, we will cover our complete surface with epoxy, a very thin layer of epoxy, and that will close all the cracks and holes. But this UV epoxy is so cool, it sets in a matter of seconds, and it doesn't give the overflowing epoxy enough time to penetrate into the wood, and that's why it's not going to make a mark once you're going to sand it. And as you can see here, I've got a UV light I'm using, and it takes about, I would say, 20 to 30 seconds for the epoxy to become super hard, and it's also very critical to repeat this process on all the small little cracks and holes you can see with your eyes. Moving to the next step in our project, and this is just to give your project a very smooth look, and we will use our palm router from Festool, and we will just give our table a small 45-degree chamfer right around our table. And I honestly do have to say I am super impressed with the dust extraction from Festool. As you can see, this machine is almost making no dust whatsoever. Moving to the final step of our preparation stage, and that's sanding all the way up to 400 grit sandpaper, because me and the client agreed on a frost smoky finish, meaning we are not going to polish our table, and we're going to sand our table down to 400 grit. Then we're going to finish only the epoxy section with a scorch pad from Festool. Now I didn't record that piece for whatever reason, and moving to the final step in our project, and that's giving our table Odie's oil. And as you can see, the middle container has got a very brown color to it. That's why we are using this container only to do all our mixing, and we're using the pigments called coffee, which is a absolutely beautiful color and a must-have color for any manufacturer doing tables. And we will typically start oiling our table with the Odie's oil Super Duper. Now what I like about the Super Duper Odie's oil, it's a very liquidy type of oil, which I feel penetrates much better into the wood. And we will apply this as a first coat with our brown pigments called coffee. We will leave our table for around about 45 minutes. We will come and wipe it off. Then we will wait 24 hours before we come to do the next step. And this is also a part I want to share with you. What we discovered lately is not applying the Odie's oil by hand, but we are actually using an old orbital sander we got lying around, and the vibration of the machine basically massages the oil into the wood. And we absolutely love this step because it makes the work go much faster when only using your hand. And we only dedicate this orbital sander to oiling only because we did use it before to sand the wood and then oil the tables and then sand the wood, and oil and dust particles does not work together, and that is going to leave your machine very dirty at all times. And as you can see, this was the corner I explained earlier on that we ended up using, which I think looks absolutely amazing. So coming back 24 hours later, this part is super critical. When you open your original Odie's oil, you do have to give it a good stir. You will see the oil will basically look like honey that's super cold, and you do have to stir it so it becomes more like a liquid. And this is a very crucial part in sealing your project, and that's by giving it the original Odis oil on top. This part is super critical, and what I absolutely love about Odis is the smell. The smell of Odis. There's no oil in the world that smells as good as Odis oil. I can promise you this. This is the part of the video I actually want to share with you. Is something we have never showed before, is how we actually deliver all our tables, and I'm actually very excited to share this with you. We had to be a total of 6 people loading this table, but we ended up being a total of 8 guys delivering the table on site, because this table was super heavy. I estimated this table at around about 500 to 600 kilograms, which is super heavy for a table. And that's going to be it for today, guys. I honestly hope you enjoyed this video, and if you think I deserve a subscription, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and please leave me a comment down below. What do you think of this table, and what would you have done differently if you had to build this table? Until next week with another super cool video, and thanks for all the support, guys. Cheers.